Hey, everyone, a new episode with Hadith Tech. Hey, Nick, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing really good today, Abdurrahman.
How are you doing today? How was your day?
It's starting a little later today. I had to do some errands this morning. I had to take one of my daughters to a couple of appointments, but aside from that, yeah, just had a quick pairing session before our recording here with one of my coworkers, Michal. So that was good. And then yeah, after the podcast, I'll be working on a PR that I'm currently working on. So.
Well, that's awesome. Is the PR that you are working on is like something in an open source project, or is it like something inside your company?
Yeah. Uh, this particular one it's a private repository at the moment, but it
Yeah.
will become open source. We're just testing out some stuff, but it's related to some work I do at Netlify. I'm on the frameworks team at Netlify on the app platform.
Yeah.
So just working on some stuff related to Next.js at the moment. So
Oh,
it's pretty interesting work.
that's awesome. So you are like experienced in React more in like
Uh,
inside, yeah.
Yeah, well, it depends. It's a little different. Being on the frameworks team, we're supporting the frameworks. We're not necessarily building applications with the frameworks.
Yeah.
We do have like demo sites and stuff to test out things, but I have done a lot of React in the past. Well, I still do React as well, but it's uh, being on the frameworks team is kind of interesting because you get to see all the different frameworks. So like I did a bunch of work for Remix support, which is React based too, but I've dabbled in Astro as well, which is one of the newer frameworks, which is a pretty exciting framework too. And there's just a bunch of them. There's another one it's currently only supported on Dino called Fresh, which is a pretty exciting one. It's not React based. It's using Preact, so React like. But
Yeah.
if you know React, you'd be pretty comfortable there. But yeah, no, it's so basically kind of dabbling in all the frameworks.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you are trying all of the new stuff and experimenting with them. Like it gives some kind of it keep you like up to date with the technology that you have right now.
Yeah.
From that perspective, I would like ask you, how did you start into coding? I think you have like a really great experience for 21 years or more. So
Yeah,
we
it's
will
it's
get
been a
back.
while.
Yeah. So we will get back into time. So how did you start in the beginning?
Yeah, so I'm dating myself here, but so the first computer we had at home was it was called a VIC-20.
Yeah.
So this was like, if anybody's familiar with Commodore, there's the Commodore 64, but there's also the VIC-20. I can't remember which one came first, but back in those days, this is probably when I was like, you know, 10 or maybe 8 years old. And the fun thing about that was just really printing your name, and like having it repeat across the screen and so on, like
Yeah.
uh, nothing really super like extensive in terms of programming, but I think uh, things that got me interested in it too. And I was never like, I know some people will say like, I've been programming since I've been like 6 or 8. I haven't really been someone like that. Like it's definitely been fun trying out things like what on the VIC-20, like I was saying, with printing my name. When I was in elementary school, they had it's still around, the language. It's called Logo. It's a programming language that allows you to draw shapes on the screen, and so you could say like, go forward 20, turn right, and so you could like draw a square, for example. But you could also draw more complex things like spirograph, like complex designs and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun as a kid because you're drawing things, and the graphics were obviously not as good as like a video game you see today. But so basically the kind of the mascot or the thing you were moving to draw was a turtle. And so
Yeah.
like if you looked on the cover or like the box of the software, you would see a turtle, but the reality was on the screen it was just a triangle.
Yeah,
So,
I
but
see. Yeah, I get that.
But you know, that it was fun. Um, but after that, I didn't really do much in programming. This is like that was in elementary school, maybe in like grade 3 or primary school, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
Um, and then in high school, we did have you know, a computer course. I honestly don't remember what we did in there, but you know, I did Q Basic at some point because we also had we eventually got a clone PC at the time. That was the second computer we got at home, so you could program in Basic, uh, which ended up eventually becoming, people might know Visual Basic. It's based off of that. Um, but I was not really big into programming. Like most of the time growing up, you know, I enjoyed sports. Like I used to love, I'm not that tall. People can't tell on the podcast, but I loved basketball
Yeah.
and I played basketball all the time. Played a bit of soccer and, uh, but not that much. And then there was in North America, there's baseball as well. I found it pretty boring, to be honest, baseball. So, but I did love basketball. But I was more, yeah, more into, I guess, sports and doing other things. I enjoyed playing video games with my friends. Uh, they had consoles at the time. I didn't. I got one later on in life, but that was kind of like, I guess, my first kind of experiences with programming. And then um, eventually pre-university, in Quebec, where I live in Canada, they have these like 2 years of pre-university that you can do. It's between high school or secondary and university. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Like, I don't know if you have friends that, you know, from a young age, they were like, Abdurrahman, I'm going to be a doctor one day. You know, I had
Yeah.
people like that. And then I was like, I'm not really sure what I'm having for lunch today. You know, like I don't
Yeah, I
need,
get
let
that.
alone a career. So,
Yeah.
um, but uh, basically what happened it's called CJEP, these 2 years. I forget what the acronym stands for, but something education, something, something.
Yeah.
But I I didn't do so well my first semester because I was distracted with other things. So then I got back on track, and I always enjoyed math. So I took some calculus courses, and I ended up taking a C++ course.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I mean, it was nothing like super complex from what I remember, but like the final exam, I think, was drawing like a Christmas tree, but with stars. So basically looping and
They look
saying like
for,
one
yeah.
star, two stars, three, and basically making a tree. And uh, I did well in that course. So, and like I said, I never knew what I wanted to do career wise. And I had a cousin who had taken computer science at a university in another province, and she recommended the program. And I just decided to do that, not being super passionate about programming or anything, but I just really didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going to university for computer science. And um, again, like I was saying before, I was into sports. I played rugby for my entire time at university, and that was a big part of my life. You know, I probably could have applied myself more in school, but I graduated from university with a computer science degree, and then um, it just kind of started from there. Like even then, I still wasn't like super into program. The only thing I would say is when the internet came out,
Yeah.
I was very excited about that. So like I started, I remember, you know, creating pages with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in Notepad on Windows, and so I should backtrack. There was that part about like web development that I did find interesting,
Yeah.
but at the time in university, at least like nowadays, they have web development courses, I believe, but at the time I was in university, this was literally when the internet was starting. So
So it was a
there was no
start of,
like web
yeah.
development courses. So the kind of courses I took were like uh, databases, data structures, operating system, like stuff that's still good to know, but nothing related to web development at all.
Yeah.
So the web development stuff that I did always enjoy. So when I got out of university, again, I graduated, but I had a very hard time finding my first job, like a lot of people do, even today. There, my first job was in 2002, so this is around like kind of around the era of when the tech boom. There was the big crash in like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
There was like some places I was interviewing at, but like just didn't get any job offers. And then I ended up working internet technical support for a long time at a ISP in Canada called Bell. So I was working there in Montreal where I live. And between that, I eventually did some administrative work because I wasn't finding a job in programming.
Yeah.
And um, basically what happened after that is like, so getting back to what I was saying, where I played rugby.
Yeah.
I played rugby at university, but I also played for a club team in Montreal. And I was at practice one day, and we would typically go out for a social after. And I was speaking to one of my teammates, and he remembered that I had just finished school. Well, not just finished school, but like it's been at least a year. And he said, "Are
Yeah.
you still looking for a job?" And he owned a software company.
Yeah.
And basically, and this kind of ties into like something that people talk about a lot, but you know, I never like the term networking, but the people you know are can definitely help you get opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And my rugby team at university and my club team, that's essentially a network of people. Like it's not
Yeah.
LinkedIn tech people, but he offered me a job based on we had played together. He trusted me. He's basically taking a gamble on me because I mean, it was my first job. You know, maybe I could have been super terrible, but I I felt a good pressure to, you know, do well because he's giving me this job, right?
Yeah, I get that.
And and that's kind of how it started. He literally gave me at the time when software was installed on CD-ROMs, he gave me a CD-ROM of Visual Basic 6 for so I could install it and do some tutorials. He
Yeah.
said, uh, I'm probably not being completely accurate with the story as it's been a long time, but basically from what I remember, he said, take this CD, do the tutorials. If you want to come work for me, come in on Monday. It was something along those lines.
Yeah, I get that.
And, you know, and I'm still forever thankful to Bob Meunier, who's the person that gave me my first job, because I know how hard it is. And like you hear about people even today, like landing that first job is so tough. And you know, yes, I did have a degree, but like I was still struggling to find work. And maybe it was a, you know, good timing being in the right place at the right time as well. But, you know, the fact that he knew me and trusted me because we literally played on a field every weekend and practiced together, uh, you know, I'm still very thankful for that because that helped me start my career, you know, and like,
Yeah.
I'm sure if that hadn't happened, I probably would have found a job another way, I'm sure. But it's just, it was a great way to kind of start in the industry.
Yeah.
And
And it's interesting to have like this kind of, your social activity is being connected to your like career as well. Like, because usually people think that why would I go and play sport if I can like program on while I'm at home and I will find a job from my
yeah,
PC directly. So it's just like showing the counter example idea of that.
yeah. And, you know, like, obviously, we'll talk about open source and stuff after, but like, it's something I tell people continually. Like, I'm not like a career coach or anything, but I'm just
Yeah.
speaking from personal experience. And like a lot of times, you know, people say go to tech meetups, you know, in your local communities, and it's definitely a good idea because that's where other like-minded people are. But your network isn't. It doesn't always have to be tech people. Like, you know, you could be out with a friend having a coffee or a tea, and then you happen to say, oh yeah, well, I'm still looking for a job. And you know, I've seen it happen multiple times. Somebody goes, "Oh, I know somebody who works over here. Just send me your CV and I'll give him your email. He'll be in touch or they'll be in touch."
Yeah.
You know, and that has nothing to do with being at a tech meetup, you know? So,
Yeah.
uh, I think going to meetups is still a good thing for sure, but your network is like all around you, not to sound too cheesy. But yeah.
It's all yeah, I get that. It's everywhere. So. Awesome. And from that, like when you started your first work, like uh, you had a really like long career after that, but like we can. I would like to know how you jumped from the careers and how you changed your
Yeah.
companies because like you worked from. I think you worked at the first the company you mentioned, then you worked in Autodesk for and you moved at the end with
Yeah.
Netlify. So how it was like this kind of all of the challenges, if it's okay for you to share it.
Yeah, for sure. There's been a few companies because it's been a while, but um, so getting back to rugby again, it's rugby is a big theme in my life. I don't mean to
Yeah.
bore people with it, but it's provided so many good things for me, not just physical activity. Um, so my second job, so my first job, I didn't negotiate it. I just said yes. I was very happy to have a job.
Yeah.
The uh, the job though was I lived on the island of Montreal, and this job was off the island, so I had to drive, commute, and so on. Which I had a car, but it would take me about 45 minutes to drive there, and then a couple year, like my about my second year there, they were moving offices and they were going to move even further, which was really not ideal for me.
Yeah.
And I happened to be speaking to another friend who I played rugby with, and he worked at a software company that was a lot closer to me. And he said, "Why don't you just come work with me?" And you know, uh, it was a funny experience, the interview, because rugby definitely played a part. But this was a time where you were used to have to, at least in North America, you would dress up pretty formally for an interview. So I
Yeah.
showed up in like a tie and a suit, and then I get there, and then the founder of the company is in a Hawaiian shirt and shorts, and so I felt kind of silly. And my future manager, who I played rugby with, he was in shorts as well. So then I was, because it's still early in my career, I was very nervous interviewing. So just, I don't remember the whole interview, but basically they said, "Yeah, why don't you come work here?" And it's 100% because of the person I played rugby with, like, for
Yeah.
sure. But it was just kind of funny at the end of that interview because the founder said, "Oh, just if you next time you come in, please don't wear a suit." And then
Yeah.
after that, I was in shorts and a t-shirt. And then yeah, so I was at a couple places there, and then uh, I moved on to. We don't have to go through necessarily every company, but the next company is kind of funny because it had a terrible name. It was called Kappa Zoo, but this was like probably 2006, I think, or 2007 maybe. So YouTube was out now. MySpace was around, which is for depending on how old people are, it's a social network as well. And then there was Facebook, and the idea of this startup was to be Facebook, YouTube, MySpace, all as one site for literally every demographic. Which, if you think about that, that seems like a weird thing, maybe,
Yeah.
but um, it was an interesting company. In the end, people in the company were corrupt, and that caused problems, and we all got laid off in a weird way. But even though that was disappointing to be let go, um, I moved on to another place, and then I won't go through all the places, but eventually I ended up at another place, and the people that I worked with at this place called Kappa Zoo, they said, "Come work with us over here." So again, the interview really wasn't so much an interview. It was just like, "We worked with you before. We'd like you to work here."
Yeah.
And this kind of ties in again to network,
Network again.
which again, like I said, I don't like that term, but that is what it is. And yeah, and I was at that company for quite a long time. And this was in e-commerce. And then eventually I wanted to, most of my career was in .NET and C# and like ASP.NET, for folks familiar with the Microsoft space.
Yeah.
But around 2015, like, React came out in 2013, And I always loved JavaScript, even though I was doing C sharp. I don't know, JavaScript just always clicked with me for some reason. And I really started to get interested in open source, and I really wanted to learn React, but we didn't have React at work. We were using Angular. And so like I couldn't learn it professionally. So this is when I kind of started to delve into open source. So this is around 2015.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of things. There was a React boilerplate project, which boilerplate projects don't really they're not really popular now because we have meta frameworks like Next.js or something like Astro or Remix. But at the time, people would it was essentially like a template to start like a React project,
Yeah.
and they just called them boilerplates. And I contributed to one that got pretty popular. It was called React Slingshot. It was created by a React consultant that people might know called Corey House. And I was a pretty frequent contributor to it. And between that and taking Dan Abramov's Redux course on Egghead, which was free and is still free, that was kind of how I ramped up into React. Redux isn't necessarily React, but at the time, that's what everybody was using for state management. And the interesting things were like I was contributing to this repository so that I could get familiar with React. And then eventually I was asked to become a maintainer, which I just said yes to. I could have said no, but I said like, hey, why not? And so that kind of gave me my first experiences of being a maintainer in open source, and as well as a contributor. And then the other thing at the time was there was this other framework called Meteor.js. It's still around. Essentially, Meteor.js, the people that started that, the company eventually became Apollo GraphQL. But Meteor was very popular, I'd say like in the mid 2015, like between 2015 and maybe 2020. I don't know, maybe a little before then. But it was another project where somebody said, hey, do you want to come work on this? And they were offering to pay me as well. And so I basically just said, yeah, sure. I know Meteor. I didn't really, but I just kind of, I was familiar with React a bit and I knew JavaScript. So I figured, hey, I could probably just ramp up. And so I contributed to that too. And that was actually my first contribution to open source, I believe. And the funny thing, not the funny thing, but I definitely understand why a lot of people are intimidated by open source. You know, you're putting your code out there, everybody sees it. I remember for my first pull request, like I wanted it to be perfect, you know, and like I didn't know Git that well because prior to working in open source, I'd used other source control. And so the short story is my PR was not perfect, which is totally okay. And it got merged and, you know, there was feedback. But after that, you know, I think for open source, once you get comfortable with like your code is out there, even if it's not perfect, it's, you know, once you kind of tear off that Band-Aid, I think it just gets easier. And it's, I don't know, open source has been a huge part of my career, like since like pretty much since starting to contribute to open source, that like my career has kind of skyrocketed through that in terms of opportunities and learnings. So, and that is one of the reasons I think that I got hired at Netlify, because they were looking for somebody who had worked in open source. But even before that, I did work at Autodesk, like you mentioned, which was super fun. That wasn't open source, but at the time I was working full time there. And I don't know if you're familiar with dev.to. It's a, you know, it's a pretty, I would say a pretty popular blogging platform. There's also Hashnode, but those seem to be like the two main ones for software development if you're going to blog. And in I think it was 2018. So I started using Dev2. I was blogging there. And at one point they said, is anybody interested in contributing to the code base? And, you know, I had done some open source and I just said, you know, I like this product. I use it all the time. I said, yeah, sure. I'd love to. And what happened was I ended up becoming the first person outside of the core team to contribute to the Dev2 code base. It's called Forum now because the software has been more generalized. There's still Dev.2, but you can create your own communities with it. And essentially, I contributed to that code base for 2 years, like in my free time. And one thing that should be said about open source is it's definitely a privilege to be able to work in open source because
Yeah.
I understand not everybody has time, depending on what's going on in your life and stuff. I happen to have the privilege to be able to, and I decided to. And what that turned into, I wasn't looking to work at Dev2, but at the time I was interviewing somewhere else. It didn't work out. And then I happened to mention it to one of the founders there. Like I said, oh, I had a good interview. We'll see how it goes. And then I messaged him back and said, oh, in the end, it didn't work out. And then they were like, oh, by the way, we're hiring. And since I had been contributing to the code base for almost 2 years in mainly the front end, they're like, the interview was really more like, we'd like you to meet the team. And if the team thinks it's a good fit, then you're hired, kind of, and then, negotiate stuff, obviously. But that's basically how I started to work at Dev2. And it was
Yeah.
100% because of my open source contributions to the project. So, which is, I think, still pretty cool. I will say, like, contributing to open source will not guarantee that you get hired somewhere or hired on the project that you're working on, but it's definitely possible. Like, I'm not the only person to do this. Like, several people have done this too. So that was super cool. And that's where I started to see, like, aside from contributing to open source, which is publicly available, it started opening up opportunities for me. And that's what I think is super cool about open source. There's a lot of things that are great about open source, but that's definitely a big one.
Yeah. And from that like experience that you had when you were talking about like the first PR, when you were thinking about having it like a perfect PR and all of that stuff, like how did you get over the first like impression about like having everything perfect and accepting feedback from
Yeah.
others? Because like this is, I think this is the most huge thing that people first encounter.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a great question. And like I said, I, I'm definitely, I'm very aware that I'm not perfect. Nobody is,
No
but
one is.
uh, yeah, but in my mind, at least at the time, I was like, I want to make this so like everything's perfect. And this is also before some tools like Prettier and like auto formatting existed. So some
Yeah.
of the feedback too was like, can you make this 2 more spaces? Which is, I'm so glad we don't have to discuss those kinds of things in pull requests now. Um, but I think it was just more like, initially I was like, oh, I've got to change things, like not that I felt like I failed, but I was a little more hopeful, like, oh, they're just going to accept it, and it's completely normal to get feedback. Like even nowadays, we're like all the time when I contribute to open source, whether it's at Netlify or an external project, there's always going to be feedback. It could be like, oh, this is great, let's merge it. But a lot of times it'll be like, okay, yeah, this is great. Have you thought about this? Or like, can you just make this change for X, Y, Z reasons? And getting feedback is a total normal thing. And I think once to your question about like, how do you deal with that? I think you just kind of have to accept that people are going to give feedback, and getting feedback is not a negative thing,
Yeah.
Um, but one important thing I would say about feedback is, and this is in general, but if you're giving feedback to somebody, you can give it in a good way and in a bad way, So like, this is
Yeah.
very important to communicate things in a good way, in terms of like, I think it's, you have to take time to give constructive feedback. Because I've worked with people, I don't know if you swear on this podcast at all, but people have told me like, this is like,
Yeah,
bad
I get that.
word. And yeah, and it's like, it didn't bother me because I don't know if it's just because I'm older and I'm just like, whatever, but that's not how you should be presenting feedback.
Yeah.
You should be there's a really great site, if you want, you could link it in the podcast notes after, but it's called Conventional Comments.
Yeah.
And it's I really love the way they approach giving feedback in there. And it's kind of like stuff like, you know, you'd say something like, nitpick, change this word. So, or you kind of remove the person out of the feedback,
Yeah.
because and it can be difficult to do initially, but I think once you get into that habit, it just it ties into so many things, because like in open source, you have a community around a project, and you want the project to be welcoming and inclusive. And that's where, like, there's a lot of things that tie into that, like your code of conduct, your contributing guidelines. But I think something like conventional comments is a great way to, like, at least from a pull request or like an issue perspective, in terms of giving feedback. It's really
Yeah.
great.
That's really great. I didn't think about the conventional comment before about like having it as a way to give a feedback through it or something like that. I was thinking about it as more like of a formal communication between the developers to have like easy understanding of the
Yeah.
situation and having this kind of change logs made automatically. But like this kind of feedback perspective is really interesting. I think
Oh yeah.
like yeah,
I
go.
was just gonna say, I'm not sure if you're talking about conventional commits, because there's conventional commits. Like if you say something like chore colon this
Yeah,
is it's conventional comments, which is it's a different project.
yeah.
Um,
Okay, I was yeah, I heard it as a commits the first time. I will
yeah,
check
no,
it
no,
out.
no, it's okay. Uh,
Yeah,
but I'll give like a concrete example, and I've given a lightning talk about it before. But like I could say like, Abdurrahman, this code is terrible. Why did you do this?
yeah,
Change this, please. That is a terrible way to give feedback.
yeah,
And something better might be like, refactor. This variable should not be here because it's used elsewhere. Consider, I don't know, creating a function or something to share. I don't know. I'm making up something on
yeah. I get
live,
that.
so but you know what I mean. Like already the way I'm talking about it versus like previously where I was saying like you're doing a bad job or change this, it
Yeah,
changes the tone completely. And that's something that's super important, and it's something that you know it gets back to like a community around a project. And if people perceive a project, a lot of times nowadays, like if people don't find a project welcoming, it could be an amazing project, but if they're like, yeah, it's really toxic in there, people won't want to contribute to it. Like so there's repercussions to also being acting that way. So
yeah.
uh, basically be a good human.
That's good. Okay, like that's really having all of it like in one sentence. Uh, that's great. Like, so one of the things that you mentioned is like that when you were starting to contributing to open source, it just like skyrocketed your work and your career in general. Uh, Beside the career and all of that stuff, did you get like any other like benefits from it, like social benefits or friends out of open source and stuff like that?
Yeah, like I've never gotten anything like a GitHub star or anything like that, but the things that I've
Yeah,
seen that have maybe one day, but that's an aside. Um, it's been more like, because my work is out in public, and we were kind of talking about this briefly before the podcast, but I'm pretty active on social media too. So
yeah,
I'll typically put things out there and say like, oh, just wrapped up this pull request, and working on this particular thing, and people see that. It doesn't mean they're going to see everything, but uh, opportunities that have arose from that have been like, would you like to give a talk here? Would you like to come on a podcast? Like, for example, not to sound too meta, but you met me in the open source Discord. You saw that I
yeah,
was doing open source work, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna reach out to Nick and let's have a chat. So stuff like that's great. I've also, through people that know me, like somebody suggested I give a talk somewhere. So I submitted a talk to Node Congress that was in Berlin. I was unable to go there, but I gave it remotely. But just stuff like that, people also knowing you in the community is helpful. Like uh, for me, I one of the things I really love doing, and I did this a lot at Dev too, and it's just interacting with the developer community.
yeah,
Um, I do generally like helping people, um, and in my career, because I've been in the industry longer, there wasn't so much mentorship, at least for me. Like Stack Overflow didn't exist, Google Chrome didn't even exist yet when I started my career. So like I used to look at stuff in books. You'd have to buy books to read up on stuff, and you could definitely find some stuff on the internet, but I didn't really, you know, I didn't really have necessarily great mentorship in my career, just because it could have been the particular time.
Yeah.
So nowadays I have to be mindful of my time because I work full time and stuff. But whenever I can, I really do enjoy trying to help people, whether that's in open source or, like a quick coffee chat, no, I don't mean like spending hours giving consulting,
Yeah.
advice. Cause if it was something like that I would definitely charge for. But like, people that are new to open source or programming, they just want to have a quick chat, I like doing that as well. And I just contributing to projects like Open Sauce, where we met. I'm a big fan of that project, and I think they're doing great work there, and they have a great community around it. So yeah, those are kind of things that also draw me to open source. So
That's really awesome. Like that's really interesting to have like this kind of both of technical and non-technical stuff that you have there. And beside that thing that you are doing in the open source, and as you mentioned, like you are, by the way, a huge shout out for Brian Douglas, the founder of
yeah.
open source, because like of the work he's doing. We hosted it before in Hadith Tech, and he's like really
Oh, okay.
awesome. I think
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was
no,
like,
yeah, he's good people.
yeah, I think he was like the sixth or seventh person who I hosted here.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so
yeah,
I want to ask you about like, because beside the open source work and everything that you are doing in your work, and that you have already as well like some kind of Twitch stream that you are doing, and you are doing as well a podcast. So like, while you are doing all of this stuff, like how do you see your impact that's happening on the community that you
yeah,
are being in it?
yeah. No, that's a great question. So I started streaming at the beginning of the pandemic, so in 2020.
Yeah,
Um, this was when I started working at Dev 2 January 2020, and then this was like right before the pandemic. I was working remote. We had our offsite. I got to meet my team, and then all of a sudden the pandemic happened. And at least where I was living, everything was in lockdown. So you were pretty much in your house most of the time. And I was probably overworking because I would just be like, oh, I don't know what else to do. I guess I'll just work. Um, but one thing that got me interested in was like, so I've had a chance to talk to Swix before, Sean Wang. When I worked at Dev 2, I had him on the Twitch stream there,
yeah,
and I'm a big fan of the Learn in Public. And I had been blogging already, but I just told myself, you know what, why don't I start streaming? Because I work in open source. There's like nothing private. Like I can just literally do my own work on Twitch.
yeah,
And but I did get that inspiration to start streaming from Jason Langsdorf, who's a coworker of mine previous coworker from Netlify. He has a great stream if you haven't seen it yet. Learn with Jason. And I think that kind of inspired me to start streaming. And then the funny thing is though, like I can't remember if you stream or not, but when I first started streaming, nobody knew I existed. So like I would literally be on Twitch with 0 people watching, and I'm just talking to myself, and it felt a little weird, but then I got used to it. And I eventually got some followers. But what happened was, because I was working at Dev 2, um, it was Hacktoberfest. We were a sponsor for Hacktoberfest in 2020,
yeah,
and myself and my coworker at the time, Christina Gorton, who's working at a place called Blues now. She's really awesome. Um, I had been streaming a bit with I started to pair with a couple people in the community. I just said, hey, let's work on a feature or something or a bug. And then Hacktoberfest came around, and we were kind of asked to kind of be the face of Dev 2 for Hacktoberfest. Like the whole
yeah,
team was involved with it, but like we were kind of like the kind of the face of it. I don't want to, because it wasn't just us, but I gave this suggestion. I said, well, I've been doing a bit of streaming with people in the community, and we have a practical dev Twitch account. I said, like, what if for Hacktoberfest we started just going on Twitch, and like we could give shout outs every week for people that contributed to the code base, on a Monday, and say like, hey, thanks Abdurrahman for this bug fix in the dev2 code base. Shout out to you and stuff. Because people like, hearing nice things about themselves.
Yeah.
And I also said, like, we can pair with people in the community. And that's kind of how it started, really. And I didn't focus so much on my own Twitch stream, because at work, they basically allowed me to stream during work hours. So I put a lot of time into the Dev2 Twitch stream, it's still up there, but I don't think anybody's used it since I stopped working there. But we interviewed all kinds of people. Like, we can drop it in the show notes, but there's a whole YouTube channel full of the recordings. Like I had an interview with Brian Douglas, like you mentioned. You had one on. Swix was on. Several people, and it was just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It's not so much. It wasn't so much, try and get a lot of followers or anything like that. It
Yeah.
was, and it still is, my favorite part of the week, when I just get to go on Twitch and I get to hang out with somebody. Sometimes I do it on my own, but I just enjoy that time. It's I think my lizard brain for my own channel, wants tens of thousands of followers, obviously, but that's not really why I do it. I really enjoy it because I get to learn about a project. I get to live code, which I think is a good skill to have, like kind
Yeah.
of being thrown into anything and you just start coding. That's, I was a little clunky at it initially, but I definitely got better at that. But getting back to Dev2, basically I was streaming on there for about 2 years or 2.5 years until I left. And then it was only after a few months, once I started at Netlify, that I started streaming on my own channel. So if you have, I definitely do appreciate the follows, but like you'll notice, like compared to like the dev account has like 3,000 followers.
Yeah.
My own account has about 525 at the moment, and the number's going up, but basically I put all the time into the other Twitch stream because it was part of my work. So,
Yeah.
um, but again, getting back to it, it's not the numbers. It's nice to see those big numbers of followers, but it's just really it's my favorite part of the week, like I was saying. And
Yeah.
a lot of times it revolves around open source projects as well, which is nice too. And I think it's helpful to people, like my small corner of the internet. I think, I have a consistent following of people that I think enjoy it. So
Yeah.
I think it helps the community to some degree. So
It's really helping the community, by the way. Like the people you are hosting, the thing that you are talking about. Like I didn't really fully like join all of the podcasts or all the Twitch streams that you are doing, but like one of the things that I get me like interested was the one that you did about accessibility, like a couple
okay,
of
yeah,
weeks ago. And it was really
yeah.
interesting because, like, accessibility is something that not a lot of people talking about, and you were one of the people who are just like going and saying, "Let's do some accessibility observability online and see how things work."
Yeah, no, for sure. It's and I try not. I mean, obviously, like have to find the guests, but I try to have different topics or different projects. So
Yeah,
it's not always like. I mean, a lot of it revolves around web development for obvious reasons. That's what I work in. But yeah, to your point, like about accessibility, like even today, like there's even senior people that might not be as aware of it. Like I think most people know accessibility is out there now,
yeah,
but it's typically one of the things that gets neglected on a project, if we're being honest.
yeah,
Uh, there's definitely companies like Netlify is really good at accessibility. It's one of their criteria when you hire a front end developer. So, but I remember working at companies where, and I've done the wrong things in the past where everything was a div and it wasn't semantic, and so you learn, but there's still companies that aren't aware of that and the reasons why it's a good idea. it is a commitment, obviously, but you have to invest into it. But I do think it's important, and like I've done a lot of front end development, so that's why I think it's super important too. But like my friend Todd Libby, who's on most socials, he always says, I think it's accessibility is not a privilege, it's a right, and it's true. Like imagine trying to use your banking site,
Yeah.
and I don't know, maybe you had low vision, or maybe you had some disability and you couldn't use the website. That's kind of inhumane, like
Yeah, that would be like some kind. Yeah, I get that. And
yeah.
that's interesting. So from like that side, like what kind of other things that you, from your experience in the front end, that you see that's really interesting and important, but like not all of people are thinking about it the same way right now.
Yeah, well, I think one thing, not that they're not necessarily thinking about it, but like I've been doing TypeScript since 2015, because
Yeah,
TypeScript has been around for a long time. If people don't know the history, it started in 2012, and it's from I think most people know this, but like the creator of C# and other languages is Anders Hejlsberg. He created TypeScript, um, and you know there's a lot of people. Well, I don't want to generalize, but like I think a lot of people are warming up to TypeScript now, and a lot of projects use it. There's it requires a build step, but there's things that don't necessarily require that. Like if you're using something like Dino, it compiles it kind of on the fly. But
yeah,
like I think I would say most new projects in front end are probably TypeScript these days. Not necessarily all of them, but it's definitely the way a lot of frameworks are leaning towards it. Like I think in Next.js, it's the default now. I think in Remix, that's what's by default. Astro has TypeScript support now. Like they have some really interesting stuff in Astro. They have these content collections, and they're strongly typed, and that's using stuff like Zod, which is a TypeScript library that works at build and runtime.
yeah,
So I think there's that. I guess I guess the the thing is, it depends when you started doing web development. I
yeah,
think, because for example, like when I started, like I was saying at the beginning, I was literally in Notepad typing HTML and JavaScript and CSS all in one file. Like when I first started, eventually there was other tools, but like there was no frameworks really at the time. So you were learning like, okay, what's a form and what's all this. And I think, uh, at least from what I've seen, because I've spoken to a lot of people that have done like boot camps, and a lot of boot camps will, they want you to get a job. So a lot of the boot camps, they teach React for obvious reasons, because a lot of jobs ask for React, but they learn React, but they don't necessarily learn like some of the things under the hood, like how to submit a form potentially, like once you dig a bit, you'll see these things. But like, I think one thing that's really nice about the newer frameworks like Remix is they're bringing web standard stuff to the framework. So like
yeah,
they rely heavily on the form and so on. And so it's kind of nice to see that come front and center, because I'm definitely not like you absolutely have to learn fundamentals before you start using React, or vice versa. Like I think you should just start building stuff, and then eventually you're going to learn, whether you started with React first or you plain HTML and like JavaScript. Either way, you're going to build something, and then you're going to learn, and you'll just increase your knowledge from there. But I do think it's great that a lot of the frameworks are going more in that direction of web standards and leveraging stuff in the platform. And the other thing too with that is the platform is just a lot better now. Like, for
yeah,
example, for people that do front end, like, query selector and all that stuff, that came from jQuery. And basically there was a need to have something like jQuery initially, because browsers, the support was completely different. But it's a great example of a project that became so important for web development that it actually, most of the stuff in it ended up going into browsers.
Yeah.
So, and there's just like a lot of there's just a lot of more great stuff that keeps coming in the platform. In terms of JavaScript, the language is evolving. There's some new elements that come into HTML, for example, like you have
Yeah.
dialogues and so on. CSS, people have poked fun at CSS for so long, but CSS is super powerful these days, and there's a lot of things you can do that you could only do previously with JavaScript, but there's so many things in the platform now, and some of it might only be in, like, for example, Chrome Canary right now, but they are
Yeah.
coming. Stuff like Scope CSS. There's just like a lot of things that I think started in userland, like Sass, for example. Like, a lot of that stuff is going in, like nested stuff that
It's
you do in Sass. That's going into the browser. It's already in the browser for, I don't know if it's every browser yet, but it's just nice to see like the platform really is improving. So that's
yeah.
why I think people are leaning on it, So
It's really interesting that, like, as you mentioned, like jQuery were some kind of open source things, and that moved to JavaScript. So you have like kind of beneficial from the ecosystem in general. Like
mhm.
from this point, like I would like to ask you, how do you see the future of like open source in general, and how do you see the future of programming in general for people who are joining or starting to their journey at this time?
Yeah, those are some good tough questions. um, I I think programming is going to become interesting because obviously AI is
Yeah,
becoming more prominent now, and you know there's a lot of scare about like, oh, we're all going to lose our jobs and so on. Maybe in like the future, like a lot of the jobs might disappear, maybe, but like right now, I think I think of AI as a tool, just another tool that I use. So,
yeah,
like for example, if I'm gonna do a for loop or an array and map over something, like normally I would just type it, but like something like GitHub Copilot will just know like if it'll just fill it out for me. So like it'll do a lot of boilerplate stuff that I don't need to think about. So people might think like, okay, that's getting rid of jobs. I don't think it is. There could be certain jobs in programming that might disappear, but I think in general, at least right now with the state of AI, I think all it's going to do is allow us as developers to move quicker. So like, I don't have to worry about this boilerplate stuff so much. I can focus on the actual feature. I can develop more features maybe because AI is assisting me in that sense. So I think it's here to stay, and whether that's a tool like GitHub Copilot, or I know Swix has some interesting projects, like it's called Small Dev, which is open source as well. We can link that in the notes if you want. I It's just not disappearing, and but AI is definitely not perfect now. Like I think a lot of us who have tried it, you can see like sometimes it's completely hallucinating and telling you
yeah,
stuff that just doesn't exist. So you still have to check things. Like I don't think I would be comfortable saying, "Hey, GitHub Copilot, build me an entire website and I'll push it to production." Like I would definitely want to still validate things.
yeah,
Um, so I think that's just something that like any industrial revolution, like for example, when cars came out, people
yeah,
stopped using horse and carriage, like things evolve, factories happen. So like people that were doing manual work, it was automated. It's, don't get me wrong, it's unfortunate that people lose jobs, but I think you just have to keep your skills up to date, really, is what it comes down to. And like I said, it helps us focus more on the problems we're trying to solve, and code is
yeah,
still important, obviously, but if AI generates like a lot of the stuff that I don't need to worry about, that's great. um, in terms of open source, it's pretty interesting, I think, because I think a lot of companies are, I think, one, it's good in a way that like working in open source is a cool thing. And
yeah,
so it's and I don't mean that like just like, hey, it's just cool. It's like I think it's good that it's kind of cool because it's getting more people interested in it. But a lot of companies, I think, also like to use open source as a potentially recruiting tool as well. So like I was definitely interested, like working at Dev2, like that's how I got my job. But like working at Netlify, I think one of the things that they thought was interesting about me was I was in open source and I saw they were doing open source. So that definitely enticed me to go work there. Doesn't mean
Yeah.
working in closed source is bad. It's just, I don't know. I like work. I've become accustomed to working in the open, and I kind of enjoy it. And getting back to like your career, like you're putting all your stuff out there, so like people can, and it's not like everybody's going to read literally every piece of code you've ever written, but they just see you're active and like they'll check out projects you're working on. I think the thing with open source is it's funding. Like
Yeah.
uh, I spoke with Josh Goldberg, who maintains the TypeScript ESLint project. I think there's other maintainers on there, but he went full open source. Like that's his full-time job now. So he relies on sponsors, and like there's like GitHub sponsors. I think he has other sources of revenue for sponsorship, but it's kind of like, it still seems weird to me that, like, for example, a project like Babel, which like every front end tool probably has, and like major companies aren't,
Using it. Yeah.
giving money back to it. It just seems really weird. But it's I don't have the answer to funding in open source because I think it's a very complicated problem potentially.
Yeah.
Like imagine you and me are working on a project, and then we get funding, so we get paid. But what about the people that contribute to the project? Like you have to figure out how do you split it up, and like
I'd have to share
I
to
don't know.
them.
Yeah. So like I think that's something, and I don't know if it'll be solved, but I think that's something that still needs to be addressed in open source. But open source is definitely not going away. I mean, the internet runs on it. Like Linux is literally most of
Open.
the internet,
Yeah.
like and there's so many open source projects that people rely on, like Babel, like I was saying, which I know there's other build tooling now, but like Vite, for example, which is more modern bundler. There's so many tools that like everybody relies on every day. Even something like Curl, that's an open source project. The person, I forget their last name, it's Daniel something, but like I imagine they get funding to some degree, but like it's really kind of like a thankless thing. People just
Yeah.
use it, they install it. Like I just wonder how we could fund it better. Like could it be something like maybe my work says, hey, every month you have $100 that you can contribute to open source, and maybe I could just say like spread it across these projects or something, or I don't know. Like again, I don't have the answer to that,
Yeah.
um but open source is definitely not going away. It's like so many people rely on it, but the problem too is, it's a whole other topic, but there's maintainer burnout. There's like even people contributing to projects could burn out,
Yeah.
so that's why like I think the funding part is important, like because there's people doing thankless work a lot of times. um, it's it's complicated.
Yeah, and like the most like we at the end when you mentioned like the burnout and all that stuff, it's kind of like humans sometimes need some kind of validation and appreciation for them because of the work they are doing. They feel like when no one is using it, or like when is a lot of people is using it but they are not giving them anything, they will just feel like what I'm doing in my life. So they
Yeah.
might, yeah, get like in bad situations.
Yeah, because like a lot of open source projects start with like, hey, there's something I want to build because I find this interesting,
Yeah.
or maybe you have a need for it, and then all of a sudden somebody discovers it, and then all of a sudden maybe it blows up. Like Babel is a perfect example. The creator, who works on another tooling now called Rome Tools, but like uh, without the JavaScript language would not have evolved as quickly as it does these days if Babel did not exist. Like,
Yeah.
because basically JavaScript became stagnant. There was ECMAScript 3, and then there was supposed to be a version 4, which never happened. Then a version 5 happened, and then Babel came out, and that's when we started seeing all this ES6 stuff, because we were able to convert code to support older versions of JavaScript. And then browsers just started innovating and putting the language up to date. So it's like it's kind of it's not the same thing, but just like how jQuery improved the browser,
Yeah.
Babel was something that pushed the JavaScript language forward for sure. So it's
Yeah.
people are complicated, projects are complicated, life is complicated.
Yeah, that's really like good show to finish that stuff. Like, thank you for that, and thank you for your joining the podcast. Like, I have two questions before ending it. If you don't mind, and you have some kind of time.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So one of the questions like came from the audience, which is like from Bader. He or she asked, wouldn't AI open more chances and openings for jobs, like maintaining AI website and stuff of that sort? So it will like you were talking about ending some kind of job opportunities, but at the same time, they are asking like it will open another jobs as well.
Oh yeah, no, I think like any technological advancements, there'll definitely be other jobs. Like the AI engineer is like a posting. Like I think Netflix has like I saw it famously posted somewhere recently. It's like AI engineer. It's like $900,000.
Yeah,
Like there's definitely and there's people talking about like prompt engineering. So that's like being able to speak to something like Chat GPT and get more relevant information, because like just like asking a person, like how you ask something will give you different results, right?
yeah,
So something like prompt engineering is becoming popular for sure. um I'm sure there'll definitely be other new types of jobs. I think all I meant more about like some jobs disappearing might be stuff that might be more rudimentary, and I don't mean that to detract from people's work, but I think some jobs will just disappear because of these advancements. But like
yeah,
Bedora said, there will open up other opportunities as well. Yeah, so I definitely agree with that.
yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that. And I think we get like to the end of the like 1 hour that we already agreed on it. So I would like to, before ending, like thank you for joining today and all of the things that you talked and shared. I really learned a lot from you, and I believe that people will learn from you. Would you like to end like episode with one sentence that you have in your mind?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This was a lot of fun. That's not my last sentence though, but I think it's like I was saying before, like especially having worked in open source, like how you treat people really does matter. Like obviously you could be an amazing coder, but if you're a terrible person, nobody's going to want to work with you. So like,
Yeah,
you know, and don't get me wrong, people have bad days and stuff. So do I, but I just say in general, be kind, not necessarily nice, because nice isn't the same thing, but like be kind to people, be helpful, be mindful of your own time, because you can, your time is limited. But like I just think, yeah, being kind and helping people, for me at least, has just helped tremendously in my career, aside from open source in general. So you know nobody's going to say, oh, that person was too kind to me, like,
yeah,
but if they will definitely say, oh, that person was terrible to me, so yeah, I think I just ended it with that: be kind and be helpful if you can. So
yeah. Awesome. That's really great to keep like and keep in mind for programmers, as you mentioned. Like no one, like, if you are a good coder, but like with a bad personality, no one would work with you.
yeah, which might be fine for an individual project, but
Yeah,
the reality is you work with people, so, and you hopefully want them to work with you. So
yeah, you're right. Thank you for that. And again, thank you for joining the podcast today. I really like enjoyed it, and hopefully we see you later online on something.
yeah,
And
no, thanks again so much, Abdurrahman.
Thank you for everything. And thank you for everyone who joined today. And hopefully, we'll see you later in another episode from Hadith Tech. And don't forget to follow Nick Taylor on his stuff online. I think it's Nick to Online right now, the name of your brand.
Yeah, the easiest way to find me now is if you just go to nikkiT.co. So that's my website, and that links to all my socials and everything. Yeah, so
Awesome.
that's probably the easiest way. But if you Google Nikki T online, you'll probably find me. So
Yeah, awesome. I will share that on the description so everyone can check it. And hopefully, we'll see you in another episode. And have a great time. Goodbye.
thanks everybody.
Thank you.